Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of the American songwriter and producer, the one and only Trott, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all that other groovy stuff. Has had a very long career in music, has been in lots of bands and written for a lot of people, including Sheryl Crow, has basically written most of her big hits. But you're going to find out more about Jeff's life and a lot more. So, yes, after several minutes of interesting but casual chat, we get down to the exciting subject that was the early formative years. Jeff, it's over to you.
Well, you know, the 70s were big for me as well. And my first concert, I listened to a lot of, British rock back in those days, a lot of Stones and Yardbirds and all that. And, but I had a friend. My good friend had this older cousin who was going to Berkeley University, and she sort of approached us one day and said, "Hey, I like the rock stuff you guys are playing here, but you need to, expand your horizons here a little bit. And have you guys ever been to a concert before?" And, neither one of us had been. And so she said, "Well, I'm going to take you to your first concert." It was Earth, Wind, and Fire. So wow. It was like I'd never seen anything like it before. They had, flashy costumes, a lot of dancing. The music was just so rhythmical and joyful and exciting. And, for a rock dude, young teenager guy to get exposed to that was like just opening up the fulcrum a little bit,
Well, yes.
And so yeah, I've always been I like the tail end, I like the 60s as well. I actually went backwards, and, rediscovered that. But so, a lot of it was funk and soul, and some of the early to mid 70s Stones period was like maybe some of the best rock music. But I also liked some of the glammy stuff that you mentioned. T-Rex is a big influence on me as well. And Slade and all that kind of stuff. I thought that was just wacky and cool. Bowie, of course. And then eventually, I tail end of the 70s, I got introduced to punk. And,
right.
And I was living in San Francisco, and there was a sort of blossoming, I don't know if that's a good description, but blossoming punk scene that was there. And I was actually going to school for broadcasting. I was going to be a DJ because I love music. I always consider myself like a music fan first, yes, and a musician kind of secondary. And so I was studying to be like a program director for radio station or DJ or whatever. And on the side, I played a little bit of music, and back in those sort of like, late punk days, everybody was starting a band. And so I kind of filled in for people. They would say like, "Hey, I hear you play bass." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, can you fill in for our bass player for like a week or something?" And I'd say, "Sure." And I kind of did that a lot. And then eventually I got in this sort of post-punk band called Wire Train in the sort of 80s. And they got signed. And that all changed my direction. I went from, spinning records to, getting in a van and going on the road with this band. So that was my early beginnings, I guess.
Well, yes, well, absolutely.
Just by accident, really, filling in. In fact, for this band, Wire Train, I was just filling in for the main guitar player. And then the lead singer had a kind of falling out with them, and they decided, well, we like Jeff better, so we're going to go with him.
Well, that's nice.
So,
Did your parents, were they any influence on you musically? Did they have any kind of exciting cultural sort of moments that you picked up on, or was it? Yeah, I just wondered if they
yeah.
were.
I mean, like they kind of, exposed me. Like my dad was more of the like Johnny Cash kind of guy, and Glenn Campbell, and my mom was a rocker though. She exposed me to the Beatles and Stones, and but sort of in that 70s period, she was working as a bank teller in Woodside, California. And I remember coming home and saying, I just met the most interesting fellow. He came in, he had like a cape on, like a black cape, and he had fangs. And I'm thinking, this guy looks like Dracula or something like that. And it turns out it turns out that he's this rock star guy named Neil Young.
Oh, wow.
And so my mom is like, hey, and I bought a couple of his records, and maybe you should listen to them. And so that kind of also got me started in that world. And as it turned out, he didn't live very far from where I lived growing up. And so anyways, I have my mom to thank, for, exposing me to that kind of music. And,
Yes.
the funny thing is like, and, I've been doing music a long time, and I hadn't really, people are saying like, gosh, have you ever met Neil Young? And in the sort of early 2000s, my publisher wanted me to go to this the ASCAP Pop Awards because I had a song that had been on the charts for a year, "Soak Up the Sun," and they were honoring Neil Young that night. And so my publisher was the same publisher as Neil's. So my publisher asked me if I wanted to meet him, and I'm like, of course, but and then it's the whole trick of what do you say when you meet, one of your heroes. I was introduced to his wife, Peg, first. She was really gracious. And then he and so on. I'm kind of like rummaging through my brain to see what sort of thing how can I connect with Neil without saying, oh, I love everything you've done, and be like this glowing fan and all that. I didn't want to be that uncool. So I was searching and searching, and I thought, my only connection with him is that so I told him the story about like when I was 16, I used to go up to Skyline Boulevard, which is right near where his property is. And I didn't know it at the time, but and I said, I used to go and drink at this Vista Point, which is like this big parking lot overlooking the Bay Area. And it's really close to where apparently he lived. And so I told him I used to get drunk. And then the reason why we would sit in that parking lot is because we could see a mile either direction. And in case we saw like a cop coming, we'd throw our beer cans into this trash bin. So I don't know why I said that. That was the only thing I could think of. And he goes, oh, well, that's where I wrote Hurricane.
Right.
At that same place, So that was a great moment for me meeting him. And later on, I got the privilege of recording with him and Sheryl Crow for a song that we had written that sounded vaguely like something off of Harvest,
Oh.
So
Marvelous stuff. Yeah,
Um,
it's interesting talking about sort of influences, because I had a brother who was 7 years older than me during that 70s period, but he had gone into that world that was prog rock of, yes, Genesis, Wishbone Ash, people like that. So I was very fascinated, I suppose, for one reason. If anybody says, don't ever come into my room and play my records, there was that, oh, I'm going to sneak into your room and play those records. And it was like, because it wasn't on top of the pops, there was the old grey whistle test, but I didn't stay up long enough or late enough to listen, to watch those sort of whispering Bob Harris talking about these kind of great super groups. And so there was that I had, which was quite interesting, the solo work of Rick Wakeman and people. But he also had Goodbye Yellow Brick Road by Elton John and Sergeant Pepper as well by the Beatles. And this was kind of that early to mid 70s. And at that stage, obviously there wasn't any like, oh, these are going to be great records. They were just there. And I remember being kind of mesmerized by the singing and or the songwriting on those albums as well, which is always kind of interesting how things sort of stick with you decades later.
Yeah, I mean, people's listening habits were a little different because that was sort of at the peak of album listening. You would put on an album and listen to it from, side one to side two and all the way through, and no sort of skipping around. I mean, you could do that with a turntable, but that's how people. I didn't really judge, like a record by, oh well, this is the hit single. I just listened to it, and it was like reading a book or something.
Yes.
But
Well, getting up to skip a song that you don't like, you had to know you didn't like that song, but also it was quite a lot of effort to get the stylus and put it over. And I used to psychologically or mentally have quite a block to, right, I've got to one day stop listening to side one and sort of flick it over to side two. And, and it's like, oh my God, another 6 songs I have no idea if I'm going to like them. But it felt like, I don't know, it was that kind of taking the great unknown. And some were brilliant. People, the work of Elvis Costello, obviously side 2 was just as good as side 1, but sometimes the singles were on side 1, and then side 2 was all the kind of B-sides. It was always, but we got to listen to both sides quite a lot.
yeah, it was a little journey into that artist, what they were up to at that time, what they were inspired by, and I miss that. I miss those times. I mean, I still listen to vinyl. I collect vinyl. A lot of young artists these days that's a form of their income is pressing a record and selling it at their shows. And I mean, I think it's, you got to do what you got to do. And I think it's wonderful that, that even the newer young generation, some of them have found vinyl, especially in the indie world,
Yes.
And I listen, it's funny because the other day I posted. I rarely post music stuff, but I posted. What was it? Riverman, Nick Drake, and
yes.
I discovered Nick Drake's music in the early '90s, so kind of later, much later, but it's really stood the test of time.
Yes.
And now I'm learning how to play the Riverman with my oldest son, who's 23, and it's wonderful. It's great. It's a great thing we can share something like that together. And I'm the type of dad, I don't dictate to them like what they should, I don't say, okay, you're going to start off with jazz and then you're going to go over to some blues and then, got to listen to this first. I never, ever say that because my parents never really did that to me. And I feel like it's a personal journey, discovering music however you do, if it's a record shop down the corner or somebody gives you an MP3 of, something new that they are into.
Yes.
But
I think
anyway.
When I was growing up, there was my brother also had one of those books, which was the probably the top 500 albums, and I remember again thinking, oh, I might try and get these, but I had no idea what they're going to sound like. You couldn't quickly stream them. I mean, this is the 70s and 80s, and so you go to the record library and sort of see if they had them, or go around record, jumble sales or car boot sales or charity shops to find some of these records, and being a bit amazed, like the Velvet Underground, having no idea
Oh,
what this was going to sound like, and then having Sunday Morning thinking, oh, that's interesting, and then suddenly it's like, oh, that's the odd track on the album, but that's the first one on side one. And then and then things like there was always Pet Sounds and Van Morrison's Astral Weeks, wasn't there? All these kind of classics that you had to try, well, not had to, but enjoyed, trying to sort of listen to. In the Incredible String Band, you thought, I must like the Incredible String Band. Not sure. Um,
yeah. I mean, that's it. It's a journey, and it's like good, good, especially with albums, it's like little novelettes or something, and when people discover that, especially like my kids now they like vinyl, but they have their playlist too. Like, I've got a younger son that listens to a lot of hip hop, and now all of a sudden he's like discovered like 60s Italian spy movie themes or something like that. Just a crazy, like, wow, how did you find this? And it's a journey, and that's what's so cool about it, is like we all have the thing that we discovered that led to something else, yet again. And
yes,
it's
well,
wonderful.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
but I was an 80s indie kid, and the 80s was sort of a fantastic period for me, I suppose. A, I was at that age, and B, there were bands like from 83 to 87, was the year of the Smiths, and they were like just massive. We'd had punk, post-punk, then we had the Paisley scene, the goth scene, psychobilly and narco punk, all this, and then Morrissey and Marr appeared in my life, and that for 5 years were the band. But there was all the other bits and pieces, obviously, that came along. But indie pop was certainly a thing. So you joined Wire Train at this time, didn't you? The sort of
Yeah. Yeah, it was about, let's see, I think 85 or 86 is when I joined. And they had been together a little bit before that. I put out, a couple of records before I was in the band. But yeah, that was that. I think that time period for me when I joined them was around the time that Echo and the Bunnymen were happening.
oh
And
yes.
I've always been a big fan of theirs. And so, yeah, I love that time period. The Smiths, obviously, that's a go-to as far as indie rock classic stuff.
Hard. So when you joined the band, and then was on their sort of next album, which was 10 Women. This was recorded in London, wasn't it, with the famous
It
Tim
was
Palmer? So did you
exactly.
was this the first time you went abroad ever?
No, I had actually in the sort of I guess 83 or 84, I had saved up a bunch of money, and I went over to London just, I don't know, just as like, I've got to check this out. But one of the main reasons is that my granddad was from Hastings. So I was sort of, half looking for, my family heritage and all that. And it ended up like sharing a squat with somebody for a month, and then I discovered I tried to get together with people to play music and all that, and I ended up meeting a couple of people who I'm still very good friends with today. But yeah, that was my first taste of London, and then eventually got to tour over there in the UK. I think we Wire Train toured with The Alarm,
Oh,
and they had a big following, and got to be good friends with all of them. And then eventually they kept us over there for quite a long time. We made the record, and then also we ended up on a Waterboys tour. It played with them, all through the UK, and I became good friends with Mike Scott. And the very last show that Wire Train did with, supporting the Waterboys was at the Hammersmith Odeon. And Mike Scott had asked me to come up on the last song of their encore and play Purple Rain. He's like, oh, you got to do the solo in Purple Rain. And I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I can, I don't know if I'm worthy to do that. And
No
he's
pressure.
like, come on. So yeah, no pressure, but I ended up doing it, probably made a couple of bad notes, but I had the spirit of it. And that was really the main thing. And following the show, and then I realized that, this is the place that Bowie had his last show with the Spiders from Mars. So I thought, wow, how weird is that? After the show, this guy named Carl Wallinger comes up to me and says, wow, I really love your guitar playing. I'm going to do a record. I'm starting this band called World Party, and, you would be perfect to play in the band. And so I said, well, let me, see, we're finishing tour, and I wasn't able to come back over and do that first record, but I eventually played on the second record, which was called Goodbye Jumbo, which is kind of a cult classic, I guess. For those that know.
Well, absolutely. Yeah. Oh my God, that was enormous. I must admit, there was so much music going on during that time. It was at that point, and also you couldn't just kind of go and buy records willy-nilly or stream them. So you felt like you had to make a bit of an investment, say, right, this is going to be my band, or that's going to be my band. It was you couldn't completely go all over the shop, really. You just couldn't.
Yeah.
It was yes, and I don't know, perhaps every generation's the same, but I just felt that we were kind of quite blessed at that point with how many records were coming out. When I look sometimes each year, it was just like, God, I can see why you kind of felt some. I mean, I don't know if this is completely true, but it was almost like, yes, I've got enough indie pop. I might listen to something else as well, like the Bundu Boys or Gregory Isaacs or something. It's like. Yeah, like I said, it was very much about the Smiths, but there was also bands like the Darling Buds and the Primitives and Mighty Lemon Drops and the Soup Dragons. Yeah. It was all this kind of stuff, and it was almost like, oh, do you want another record? It was a bit like being at a restaurant. I'm totally full. I might listen to something else today. But yes, we were quite lucky. So there were a lot of bands that I kind of missed that I've kind of gone back, 40 years later and went, God, I can't believe I didn't go and listen to this band more. But confession time. Really, isn't it? Like, I don't know, the Chameleons from Manchester.
Oh yeah, Chameleons UK.
They were stunning. And also what was also interesting, I feel that every kind of 5 years, 3 to 5 years, there's another kind of chapter of music that happens, mainly because there's a next wave of 16 to 18-year-olds who are wanting to discover, as in my case, your music, your soundtrack, to hear that first single from a band, go and see them in a small club. And I felt that after 87, the Smiths had broken up, but also the world of ecstasy came along, and there was this kind of new change of people wanting to make dance music from, the Manchester scene. But also then in Seattle, you had the beginnings of the grunge scene in Seattle, because that's when I saw, Tad at the Norwich Art Centre, and supporting them was Nirvana. So, and that was kind of like the double bill. And then you had the Pixies and Throwing Muses on 4AD records. And there was that little bit of a shift. So what was it like for you in Wire Train? Because you'd done another album with them, and then you did No Soul, No Strain, didn't you, in 92? What was, because you were definitely going into a period where music was going to, it was going to be Nevermind and then those bands, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, I think we went, we were always trying to do sort of like an indie pop thing, a lot of chimey, echoey guitars and all that stuff. I still love that stuff anyways, but yeah, I think by the, early 90s like that, a lot of people had rediscovered more rootsy style music, just plug in and go and play, not like, not try to produce stuff too much, So I had rediscovered, the band and Bob Dylan, I kind of like, went backwards a little bit.
So was it the basement tapes you discovered?
Yeah, the basement tapes, and I spent a lot of time listening to like Graham Parsons and Grievous Angel and Emmylou Harris and that kind of stuff. And even though that wasn't like typically what I would listen to, it just, there's something about it that seemed almost, I don't want to say religious, but, spiritual, I guess, in a different way. And I knew that, Graham had a lot of influence on Keith Richards and Stones and stuff. And it kind of introduced a more, I don't want to call it Americana, because that's like, it's all kind of derived from probably Ireland, really, originally, that kind of music. But yeah, so I kind of went backwards and went more rootsier in those days. The going from the Tim Palmer and the Mission and, Sisters of Mercy and that kind of stuff to more like, okay, let's get real, let's get raw. And
because on that album you did with Wire Train, you had Bill, is it Bottrell, who was producing?
Yeah, Bill Bottrell. And so Bill, talk about, degrees of separation. Bill, in his early years, was Jeff Lynne's engineer. And so he had learned everything, all about recording through Jeff.
Oh, and the Traveling Wilburys.
Yeah. And so he also did, he ended up, I think, producing a few tracks for Traveling Wilburys eventually. And as it turns out, Bill Bottrell has been my mentor for a long time. Even though he's not really doing a lot of music these days, but by working with him, I learned a lot of things that I didn't know, like what the possibilities were.
Yes, because before working with you, he'd been with Michael Jackson, Madonna, and Tom Petty. So quite a lot of heavyweights there in that period.
Yeah, exactly. That's not so much indie, but it's like, I think at heart he's always about great music, about songwriting. He wrote Black or White with Michael Jackson, and even did the rap that's in the middle. He originally did the rap part, thinking that Terry Riley or one of those guys was from New Jack City was going to do the rap, but
right.
He kind of like insert rap here, and he did this little rap. And when it came time to like pick somebody to do the rap, Michael told him, "Oh no, Bill, we're going to use yours," and we're going to use that is the rap, and so Bill's like, "Oh my God, I didn't expect that."
Yes.
But
blimey, that would have been very scary. But
yeah.
And then
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that at that stage, did you know when you were doing that album, this was almost going to be the end of the band at this point?
Yeah, well, we had gotten dropped in the early 90s, and that's why I ended up going, I ended up like living in London, in North London, to work with World Party. I was there for well over a year, and I did a little bit of touring with them, and I love Carl Wallinger. I think he was a fantastic songwriter, and we had a lot of similar influences and stuff. But anyway, I was over there for a little bit, and then I was running into work visa problems back then, because I think it was Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister, and I don't know, it was really challenging, to be there and not always have your papers and all that stuff. But our band ended up getting re-signed to MCA. And then that was why we were able to get together with Bill Bottrell and make, like a comeback record. But it only went so far. And in turn, that's how I eventually got to play in Tears for Fears right after the band got dropped for the second time. So I ended up, spending a lot of time in Bath, and doing that as well. But
Blimey, that must have been, because you're seeing the sights here, Bath and the West Country. Did you ever go down to see, not just the festival, but did you go to places like Glastonbury and see?
oh yeah. Yeah, I went to a couple of Glastonbury festivals. Sheryl Crow played one in '97, and when I was touring with her, and so I ended up playing. I played it, and and I did a couple of festivals with World Party. I think, what was it called? Trip to the Tip or something.
Right.
It was in Ireland, I think. So yeah, I got a good taste of all of that. It's funny because I almost feel like in some ways London is a little bit of a second home to me, and I still have a lot of good friends that are there, and
well, that's nice.
So,
It's nice to sort of have that connection, especially during that period, because the 90s then, I mean, the 90s does sort of take off quite a lot. I mean, in so many ways, doesn't it? So when Wire Train finishes, did you all sit down and have a meeting, or does it not work like that? How does the band come to an end?
Well, we it just was sort of, I think, because we lack of success or whatever, that can, everybody's thinking like they're going to be the next big thing, and then when it doesn't happen, and then you start blaming each other, gosh, if I had done this, or maybe we should have written better songs, or and everybody's starting to point the finger, and and unfortunately, well, like our last, we made a lot of like poor decisions and stuff like that, and like we we were given money to write or do a record, which ended up being our last record that never got released, called Snug, and we wrote a song called "Who Gives a Shit," and and I think we immediately got dropped after that. So it's sort of like, all right, well, that goes to show you, when you're too full of it, yeah, you get it. You get the
Yes,
felt that,
that went down so badly, didn't it?
Oh man, it was poor decisions and stuff, and a lot of musicians become victim of their own egos and
yes.
all that stuff. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, and I was going to say, then you sort of got this period in the early 90s where obviously, you're sort of back at ground zero again, or sort of at the start again. So what do you then, how do you navigate this next bit? Do you sort of think, oh boy, was that the potentially it, or are you feeling kind of confident?
Well, yeah, I was, faced with the reality of, okay, well, now you're unemployed, you're living in Los Angeles, what are you going to do? Is it like go back to school? I don't know if I'm going to do that. And then sort of out of the blue, my old band, the drummer of Wire Train, Brian McLeod, gets a hold of me and he says, hey, I got hired to be the drummer in Tears for Fears for a record called Elemental, and Roland Orzabal is looking for a guitarist that can do harmony vocals and is a multi-instrumentalist and this and that, kind of utility guy, I guess. And so I said, well, hell, what I don't have anything else going on, so yeah. Of course, if they want me, do I have to audition? He's like, well, no, actually, when Roland found out that you were in World Party, he just said, yeah, bring him on board. So he was a big fan of World Party, and that led to me getting hired, sight unseen, I just had to get the music and rehearse with the band and learn all the tunes and everything. And that was a very efficient band situation where we would spend time in the studio listening to the multi-tracks, and then Roland would, choose what parts we played. Okay, Jeff, you're going to play this slide thing here. And we would do, full band rehearsal in the afternoon, and then break for dinner. And then after dinner, we would have vocal rehearsals, and it was just a cappella. We just like
Right.
do all the songs, okay, Jeff, no, you don't sound so good singing this high part. Let's move you in the middle. And that's kind of how it worked, and the band that we had, or that Roland had assembled, that was Brian McLeod, Jeb and Bruni, Gail Ann Dorsey, who went on to play with David Bowie, as you know,
yes.
and Alan Griffiths, who had a lot to do with writing a lot of the songs on Elemental. Well, so it was a 6-piece band, and normally I think Tears for Fears had a much larger ensemble when they toured, and of course they weren't with Kurt Smith at the time, so we just kept it, mean and lean, and it was a great experience for me. It was probably I did a couple of U.S. tours, and all over Europe and the UK and Asia and stuff like that.
My God, and Tim Palmer produced that as well, didn't he? Or co-produced?
Yeah, we ended up doing while we were on the road promoting Elemental, during sound checks, Roland would like, oh, hey, I have this song idea, and then he would, go into it. And I think it was Raul and the Kings of Spain. And so we would all kind of contribute to doing that. I mean, he was very generous. We weren't really doing any actual songwriting, in the classic sense of sitting down and working out the lyrics and all that. But he gave us all, slice, which I thought was very nice. And so I spent, it might have been like 93 and 94 or something like that with them. And I eventually came, when that wrapped up, I came home, and I had to get another gig. And so I played with this guy named Pete Droge, who was a sort of, a cross between Neil Young and Tom Petty. And he just needed a lead guitar player. So at that time, I was actually writing I was thinking, well, maybe this is the time where I should write my own songs, and do a solo or form a band or do that. But I ended up going on the road with Pete Droge, and which actually, I got to scroll back. I met Sheryl. I got a phone call from Bill Bottrell saying, hey, after we made No Soul, No Strain, you left all of your, good majority of your gear in my studio. Don't you want to pick it up and use it? And so I went to his studio in Pasadena, and go in his studio, and he's working with this young girl, Sheryl, a young Sheryl Crow, and we had a lot of mutual friends in common, and so it was a nice introduction. I got my stuff, loaded up my car, and as I was getting ready to pull out of the parking lot, Sheryl runs out and raps on the passenger side window and says, hey, do you want to come in and sing some harmonies on the song that Bill and I just recorded? And I'm thinking like, well, I got nothing else to do. So I go back in and did all the oohs and ahs, kind of like, Sheryl and the band singing. And that's how we first got acquainted. And then, that was for her first record. I did a couple of the Tuesday Night Music Club sessions where actually I ended up being the lead singer on one of the songs.
Right.
And then she was, on the road for that first record. It was just, she slugged it out for about a year before she even got any airplay.
Were you aware of that kind of scene around the?
A little bit, yeah. I knew what they were doing, and then I knew she was on the road in a van, and just playing clubs and, small theaters and trying to get our music out there. And then, and I was kind of doing the same thing, only I was playing guitar in Pete Droge's band. And we had supported, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, and we did Neil Young, and we got a lot of really good opening slots. And towards the end of our tour, Pete comes up to me and says, "Hey, can you do another like 10 days with us?" And I was thinking, well, yeah, sure. What is it for? We've been asked to open up for this young artist named Sheryl Crow. Have you heard of her? I'm like, yeah, I sang on her first record. And so that's, so we ended up supporting her. And then I think after we supported her, she said, you need to play guitar for me. Let's, when my tour ends, let's get together and do some writing. I hear you're a really good writer and all this stuff. So that's where we all began,
Oh, there you go. Yes, that first album. Yes, the first, because that's the one that starts with the first album's "Run Baby Run," isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So which is the track that you're singing on?
I'm on "Can't Cry Anymore," and so all the oohs and ahs and harmonies and stuff like that. That's my voice in there. And I had written a little bit with her on that first record, but nothing that made the record. I think one song that we wrote called 6 Feet Under, or no, it was called On the Outside, ended up being used for, have you ever heard of a show called X-Files?
Oh, yes.
Yeah, it was used for that. And that was my first, cut with her song that we wrote together. And, but anyway, yeah. So, in between that time period of her doing that first record and, finishing up with Pete Droge, I ended up living in Silver Lake, which is sort of East Hollywood, in a kind of rough, at the time, it was very rough neighborhood. There were gangs and all sorts of stuff. It was very unsettling, but it was very affordable for me to live there and do, some session work and all that. And that time period I spent playing a lot of piano and writing my own songs. So I had it in my mind that I would, I'd do a solo record or try to form a band where I'm writing all the songs.
Yes.
And I actually had written, so living in this little apartment, I was living with my girlfriend at the time, and she came up to me and just said, well, hey, I hate to say this, I love you, but I hate LA. I can't live here. This is like, I'm a small town girl. It's so lonely here, and you're doing music and all this, and I just feel like I don't really fit in. And so it was like one of the, a big breakup for me. And I felt, oh, this is horrible. And so, she gets in her car and leaves, and I'm just devastated. And I hadn't realized that I really had fallen in love deeply with this person. And when I realized that, like a lot of musicians, singer-songwriters, it's part of therapy. What do? You write a song about it. And so I was trying to like figure out what to do. And I ended up, finding a bottle of, I was looking for something to drink and get really hammered. And I found a bottle of cooking sherry under the kitchen sink.
Right.
And I ended up like polishing it off, and I ended up writing this song, like more of a laundry list of what could I've done to change, my girlfriend's, made created a better environment or been more loving, or if only I was richer, or all those like things that you comb over in your mind, like what I could have done this much better, and I ended up writing this song, and I ended up falling asleep about 2 o'clock in the morning. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, the biggest earthquake in LA history happened at Northridge. My entire ceiling of my apartment collapsed on top of me. And I was my heart was crushed, and then I was crushed, and so it was a really dire situation. Well, the song that I wrote was "If It Makes You Happy," and I ended up sharing that with Sheryl Crow probably a year or two later, when I eventually got to write with her. We wrote several songs for her second record, and that was one of them. And it was an idea that I had, and I thought it was good. But then when I played it for her, it felt more important. And she ended up like saying, she told me, "Hey, can I noticed that, you're only halfway done with the lyrics. Can I fill in the rest?" And I'm like, "Of course," like if I put it out myself, like my family and maybe 10 of my friends would have heard it. But I'm thinking, well, it's a Sheryl Crow, and she's going to do it a lot better than me. So we ended up, recording it on the second record, and I had no idea that it was going to be, a big hit, or, like have the success that it did. But I think one of the things I've learned over my many years of doing music is that the reason why some songs become very popular is because they start from a real place,
Right. Yes.
deep inside somebody. Maybe it is, like they say, the struggling artist or the tortured artist. I hate to say it, that's like really, that's good fuel for songwriting, because it's something that's real, or at least it's mentally real. And so I feel like, that experience, led me to a whole new chapter in my music career. In fact, I had thought that I was, this was the end of me, like I'm okay, I'm gonna go back to school or do something or get a job. And I was virtually on the end, thinking like, okay, let's get out of this, obviously, failing miserably. And then that came along, and it was like, nope, you're just beginning.
Yes. Did that feel like quite a partnership for you and Sheryl Crow at that stage? That sort of kind of moment and getting that song together? Because obviously the Tuesday. It was a Tuesday evening. Oh my God, I can't remember what it's called now.
Tuesday Night Music Club.
That's the one. That sort of that it starts so well, doesn't it, and finishes so kind of on a downer for her. And then she has this kind of, can you write the follow up album after the kind of what had happened through all the ins and outs? Did it feel like the two of you were slightly holding on together, thinking we're going to have to prove everyone wrong? So we've got a lot to prove.
Yeah, I would say that's a good observation, because that's sort of, in a way, we did find ourselves like, okay, at not an impasse, but like at a fork in the road. It's like, okay, well, what do? You follow up this very successful record with, that you had a lot of, top-notch songwriters helping you, and some top players and great producer and all that. How do you follow that up? Well, we had gotten together initially, to write for that second record. She and my friend Brian McLeod and I ended up going up to Brian McLeod's cabin up in Gold Country near Yosemite, and his parents had like this crappy little cabin, but we ended up like taking a bunch of instruments and a little bit of recording gear, and we just spent our time writing songs. The isolation was really helpful in having us focus in on what we needed to do. And so some really great songs came out of those sessions. And after doing, writing, I don't know, probably 5 or 6 songs with her, I get home and I never heard back from her. And I'm thinking, well, I thought that was going so well. I don't know what happened, and so I started working more on my own thing, and then I got a phone call from this guy, this manager, Andy Slater, who managed the Wildflowers.
Right.
And he calls me up, and this is like a month after, not hearing anything from Sheryl. And he says, "Hey, buddy, I hear, you've been working with Sheryl a little bit and this and that." Well, as it turns out, the Wildflowers are looking for a lead guitarist, and your name got brought up several times. They were big fans of Wire Train and big fans of Pete Geroge, so you seem like the perfect fit. Why don't you come down to the rehearsal place and just have a play and see if there's any sparks or anything. So I went down there, and we played for a couple of hours, and at the end of the rehearsal, Jacob came up to me and he goes, "Did somebody give you a copy of our record?" I'm like, "No. What do you mean?" And he goes like, "Well, how did you know what to play?" And I just said, "Well, I just played along to the music."
Right.
And he's like, how could that possibly be? And I said, "No, well, I don't have your record because it hasn't come yet."
Yes.
So, but anyway, so I rehearsed with them for I think a couple of weeks, and I think we were supposed to go on the road like a month after that, and I'm excited, like, wow, did a photo shoot with those guys and everything. And I get home from one rehearsal, and I get this call from Sheryl saying, "Hey, what are you up to?" And I said, "Oh, things are good. I'm going out on the road with the Wallflowers." "Oh, okay." And I thought, I thought that was a surprising, like, "Oh, I'm happy for you. That's awesome." No, there was a big silence, and she said, "Well, I'm in New Orleans right now, and I'm going to record a bunch of those songs that we wrote." And I'm like, "Oh, great." She goes, "Well, are, are you okay just going on the road and playing covers, or do you want to like play, record some of the songs that you wrote?" And I was like, "Wow, are you asking me to come out and record?" And she's like, "Yes, I am." you know, and I said, "Well, gosh, I don't know what to do. I'm going to have to tell Jake, I can't do this." And so I ended, I had to tell him, "Look, I've been asked to do a record with Sheryl Crow, and I'm going to have to bail on this." But, she's recording a bunch of songs that we wrote together. And he was like, "You fucking asshole, like, how could you do that? You're so heartless." And I was like, I was thinking, well, yeah, maybe I should tell her, like, yeah, I can't do it. And then I was thinking, like, no, what the fuck am I talking about? So I ended up blowing off the Wallflowers to do that second record with Sheryl in New Orleans. She had gotten, so I flew out there, and Bill Bottrell was, set to produce it again. And I pull up in a cab right in front of the studio in the heart of the French Quarter. And I get my bags, and I see Bill Bottrell standing, and I'm thinking, oh, he's here to greet me, and but he's got a guitar and a suitcase in his hand. And I'm like, "Well, where are you going? I thought we were making a record." He's like, "No, I'm going back home. Sheryl will explain to you." So I'm like, wow, how weird. I'm getting out of a cab. Bill Bottrell he held the cab so that he could get, a ride to the airport. So like coming and going. And I'm like, okay, I'm really confused. So I see Sheryl and she's crying and she's like, I don't know. Bill and I just had this big, argument, and he decided that he was not going to be a part of making this record and all this stuff. And so I'm like, well, gosh, I just, I broke things off with the Wildflowers. I flew all the way out here. Is this really, really happening? And she said, well, what do you think we should do? And I said, well, I mean, is the studio paid for? Is there an engineer? Well, let's just record something and see how it goes. And so we ended up being there for, of course, like about 4 or 5 months. And we made that second record that had, Every Day is a Winding Road and If It Makes You Happy and A Change Will Do You Good and all. I mean, it was a great record. And it was different than that first record because it was a little more rock oriented, had a little more indie vibe because I'd been listening to Pavement and Beck and a bunch of indie stuff at the time. I think Los Lobos, Latin Playboys, that kind of stuff.
Yes.
So anyways, that's the long of it all. Sorry to.
Well, no, it's a fascinating story. God, no, it's an interesting one. And obviously, she must have been relieved to say, yes, see, it wasn't the other guys who made the first record. I still have the magic. I mean, there was a lot to prove, wasn't there?
Yeah, there really was. And I think the thing is that, it was an opportunity for me because I had, it was definitely, had a big hand in writing, these songs with her. So she did get help. But I mean, I feel like any kind of artist, no matter what, they have somebody that's behind the scenes. And I'm not saying by any stretch, hey, I did everything, I'm the reason why, I'm the real genius behind the scene. I'm not. But I definitely, the energy and ideas that I brought, helped her land on her feet and then continue the path, and I pretty much feel very grateful to have that opportunity, so I no longer play with her live. I mean, I did up until the Globe Sessions record in the late 90s. And then I went on to, become a family man. And I, just kind of felt like I didn't really feel like being on the road anymore. And so, so that's kind of, and fortunately, we stayed friends and I ended up making the records with her anyway. So, I mean, the only record that I didn't make, well, the only 2 records I didn't make her 100 Miles to Memphis record. And I didn't do the very last one that she did, the Alarm Clock one. I was producing another record and I couldn't get out of my, I was under contract, so I couldn't just bail to do a couple of songs with Sheryl. As much as I wanted to, I, was sort of, committed, I guess.
Yes, well, absolutely. Did Sheryl Crow, did she play at Woodstock 99, or was that just a dream I've had? Was that one of those ones that she was at? Did she play at one of those big festivals?
Yeah, she's played a bunch. I mean, we played Glastonbury in '97, but I'm pretty sure she's played, since I left. I think she has played a load of festivals. And I know that we while I was in the band, we went all over Europe and did all those, summer tours.
Yes.
Pop and Ratskeller and all those, or whatever, I mean,
did you like the festival circuit? Did you enjoy the sort of the big crowd?
I loved it. The thing that I loved the most was that I got to see all these bands that I was a big fan of, like Radiohead. I think they were headlining the big festival tour that we did in '97. It was Radiohead. It was Beck. was also on that. I think it was Jamiroquai,
Right.
Fun Loving Criminals. I'm trying to think about Spearhead, um, Supergrass. They were really
Right.
fantastic. I mean, well, of course, Radiohead. That was like, holy cow, where did these guys come from? Like, wow, are they amazing?
Yes.
So I love that. And then In Excess did they were doing a comeback tour, and they were playing like in the middle of the afternoon, and I kept thinking like, holy cow, I would hate to be in the band that had to follow In Excess, because they were on fire still, even though their popularity had waned, from not being in the game for a while, but they were incredible. I mean, Michael Hutchins's stage presence, and I mean, he was very underrated, I'll tell you, because I think he was maybe one of the greatest performers,
Yes.
like their music or not. But I thought that they were original. They did like that sort of, I don't know what you call it, like funk rock. No,
Yes.
I don't know.
It was.
I don't
It
know.
was. It was. Yeah. It was. Yeah. It was one of those bands. He was very charismatic, wasn't he? Really.
Yeah.
And what did you? With obviously. So with Sheryl Crow writing with her on those albums, but not touring, did that mean you were doing lots of other side projects as well during that time as well? Did that allow you periods where you could just do other bits and pieces, and then when you got the call saying, actually, we've got a new album to write, how does that process work? So I just wondered, when you were coming to do something like Wildflower, that was in 2005, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You're very involved in that album as well, aren't you?
I produced that, with John Shanks. Well, he originally, that record, she had asked me to produce and make a record with her. And she said, hey, I'm going to do 2 records. I'm going to do one that's going to be the sort of art rock thing, and I want you to do that. And then I'm going to make a really super commercial record with John Shanks. And so I thought, oh, that sounds cool. I mean, I'm always up for making a record with you. So whatever the role is, great. So it's so funny. Working on this record, and then Sheryl was like, hey, here's a song that I did with, that I've been working with John. What do you think? And all this stuff. And I listen, I go, oh, that's really good. She goes, well, no, what do you really think? And I was like, well, I would have done this a little bit different, but that's just me, And she's like, well, what would you do? And then I'd say, well, I'd have, I don't know. So it was so funny. And then I realized, like, oh, she's probably doing the same thing with John. It's like, here's some songs I did with Jeff. What do you think of them? And so it was like this weird cross-pollination type of thing. And in the end, what she ended up doing is merging the 2 records, which I didn't think was a very good idea to do, but I didn't have any say in that. But so the way to sort of give it some sort of continuity, because the 2 records were so completely different, when I made records with Sheryl, usually she and I make the records, and we have a drummer, because we're both multi-instrumentalists. We play everything. And then if we need something special, a solo or something like that, hey, let's get Gary Clark or somebody to come in and do that. Or, strings or whatever. And so the way she put it together was, she said, hey, you know what? Let's get a really good string arranger, and I want to put strings on everything. And I'm like, okay, that sounds like fun. So, well, who do you want to get? And I said, well, that guy David Campbell, Beck's dad, does some wonderful strings for Beck. So why don't we go with him? And so we ended up hiring him. And when it came time to that Wildflower record had, I don't know, like 11 or 12, 13 songs, something like that. We had to get all the strings done in like 2 days. And so, I get down there and you know, meet with David Campbell and, you know, go through the songs and what we're trying to get out of each. You know, I had some notes or whatever, and I just figured, well, I'm just going to let him do what he does because I don't want to interfere with that, you know, and I can make edits after the fact. And so when I get there, John Shanks is there. And so I thought, oh, okay, well, when it's your song, you know, you get in there. And since you're producing it, we had to tag team. We had to kind of like, okay, Jeff, your song's up. Okay, go in there. It was, I don't think I've worked as hard in my life as producing 6 to 7 songs in a day with full orchestra. That is a long day. I think I was the last person to leave the studio like at 2 a.m. or something like that. It was insane.
Right.
But it's a very colorful record. And you know, songwriting wise, I think there's some. I think that one has. Does that have "Letter to God" on that?
Yes, it's got Lifetime's chances are live it up. Letter to God.
Yeah, "Letter to God." I think that honestly, I think that's one of her best songs. And the "Chances Are" song, I wrote most of the lyrics because I'd been reading Terrence this book called Archaic Revival, which was a psychedelic. It was a book that Terrence McKenna, this professor at Berkeley, had written about how psilocybin mushrooms were the telephone to God or something like that. And I was like, wow, this is insane. So I read it and I was like, and, you know, the whole aspect of, you know, apes, you know, picked up these mushrooms and ate them. And that's when they developed speech patterns and stuff. And I thought, holy cow, what an amazing book. So I wrote this whole, you know, song and then Sheryl basically, I was trying to be like Nick Drake on it. And then Sheryl went through and edited most of the lyrics and made it a much better song than where I had it. But we got to put orchestra on that. And that is that, you know, I listened to that maybe, you know, a few months ago, and it holds up pretty well. I mean, it sounds great. And it never got much, you know, it's not a single or, you know, it's one of those like great album tracks that people discover, you know, just by accident.
Yes, God, that's amazing. Because when she does Detours, is it Detours, which comes out 3 years? She's working with Bill again, isn't he? He's back on the scene. Did that feel like quite a nice project to be working on?
That was, and because she had asked me, she had moved to Nashville or just outside of Nashville after she got breast cancer, and so she had to spend a lot of time rehabilitating from that. And fortunately, she got through all of that, and she had moved to Nashville to be closer to her family in case, you know, things went awry for her wise. And, you know, she said, hey, you know, I want to make a cool kind of acoustic-y record. I want to get back to, you know, really focusing on, you know, songwriting and make it more of a singer-songwriter record than, you know, an art project and all that. So great. And, you know, she goes, well, who do you think who should we work with, you know? And, you know, Bill came to mind. I thought, gosh, I would love to work with him again. I didn't get a chance to really work with him in New Orleans, you know, the first time around. Let's get Bill. I mean, you know, and so that was really an amazing time period. We got to, you know, I feel like I got to work with my mentor and be with, you know, people that I had so much respect for and love.
Yes.
You know, so yeah, that was a cool record. That was, I think, when A&M Records got bought up by Interscope, and I believe Jimmy Iovine
Oh yes,
had taken over, and you know, and he was like he was always calling up Sheryl like the whole time we were making the record. And he's like, Sheryl, you got to get into hip hop. Yeah, I know on that first record, yeah, all I want to do is, has a bunch of spoken word, and you could just easily turn that into hip hop. I just like, she told me that, I was like, on, wow,
Yes.
really? You really want that to happen? It's like, and that's where I think a lot of artists have to really take a look at, whether you're following or you're leading. Like I think the best artists will always be leading. Like not paying attention to the trends. Though it's sometimes hard because you're listening to other people's music, but you really got to follow your own path, and so fortunately we didn't listen to Jimmy on that, but we made it. That Detours record is really an excellent record, I think. And
Yes.
there was a lot of songs that didn't make that record that were as good as anything on the record. We had an
Yeah.
abundance, but yeah.
And then one of my favourite artists, I loved her solo work, Stevie Nicks, because you get to work with her in, is it Trouble in Shangri-La, isn't it? That's that
Yeah.
classic that came out, which again I thought was just a great album actually from dear old Stevie. So how did you get involved with that project?
Well, okay, so I worked a little bit on that record, but scrolling back to Globe Sessions record, we were in New York, in this warehouse that, kind of pieced together a studio. I mean, the walls were not even painted. They were like sheetrock and, moving blankets that were on the wall for sound treatment. I mean, we had to do everything ourselves pretty much. And there was just a very slim handful of people that actually worked on the record. But so, we were in New York for, I don't know, maybe about 6 months or so. And we were just finishing up. We had everything recorded, and we were trying to figure out, what else needed to be done. And I was like, man, what's the point of trying to find things? It's like either they're things to do or they're not. And I think a lot of times artists, it's hard for them to like let go of the project and it's
Yes.
just let it happen. Like a writer, or you're done with your book. Like, okay, it just, you've already had it edited. Why add more to something? Unless it really needs it, if there's some problems. So anyways, I was excited that we finally agreed, like, okay, let's get this mixed. And I hadn't been home in a long time. And so I was really looking forward to going back to California. And Sheryl calls me up at I'm all packed, ready to go to back home. And she says, hey, would you mind staying like one more week? And I'm thinking, oh my God, why? Are we working more on this? How can we? No. Stevie Nicks has asked me to produce this soundtrack for Practical Magic. It was I think it was a Nicole Kidman, Sandra Bullock film about, some witches, modern day witches. And I love Stevie, of course, and I'm thinking like, gosh, yeah, who wouldn't want to do that? But I was burnt. I had really spent 6 months nonstop doing music and was really looking forward to going home. And I told Sheryl, I mean, like, Stevie, there are other guitar players, why me? And she's like, well, you do a certain thing, and that's what Stevie is looking for, to have more of a direction that's like what she does. And I'm a big part of that sound or whatever. And so I said, well, Sheryl, thanks. It's probably crazy, but I think I'm going to just go home. And she's like, oh, really? You're going to pass up on working with Stevie Nicks? I'm like, well, it's not about, Stevie Nicks. It could be anybody. I'm ready to go home,
Yes.
and so, and then I get another call about a half hour later. Okay, I'm going to make you producer. You're going to produce it, or you're going to co-produce it with me. We're going to do it. And it's just 2 songs. And I'm thinking, gosh, okay, well, she upped the ante for sure. I was thinking I'm just going to play guitar, so they could get anybody to do that. So I'm thinking, wow, this is a good opportunity for me. So I decided to do it. And it was just a week worth of, it was just getting 2 songs basically. And Sheryl, I say, well, what songs are we doing? And at the time we used we had a lot of cassettes and stuff like that. We, had like a little, a lot of song ideas on one of those Radio Shack tape, little hand tape recorder. Use those a lot, like a dictaphone, or like people use audio files for their, on their phone. And so she hands me this cassette, and she goes, well, these are the 2 ideas. And so I'm like listening to them, and it just sounds like a late night, 1:00 in the morning, Lindsey Buckingham playing okay, this one's in D, and playing D chord for half an hour, and then Stevie reciting some poetry over it. And I'm thinking, I don't really hear a song over that. It sounds like a late night that we all have done before. And of course they sound great because they are who they are, but I don't hear the song. And so, and I listened to it a little bit more. I'm thinking like, well, what if they just like repeat, an easy way of getting a chorus is just, repetition. Just throw a little, repeat a line a couple of times. Just very basic, And then the other song was one that I think they had already released or something like that, called Crystal. Yeah, Crystal. And so we went in. We had great, Ben Montaigne on keyboards, and we had Jerry Murata from Peter Gabriel's band playing drums, and I think a couple of Stevie's guitar players and all that stuff. And I ended up really not playing, a lot. I think I played some acoustic and some mandolin.
Right.
And it was an interesting process, working with Stevie Nicks. It's old school in that, she has like this large entourage of people with her at all times. I mean, like, 10 of her friends, backup singers, and they're all rolling up joints and drinking cognac and talking while you're in the control room trying to work, and it's like, whoa. And I just remember, Stevie saying, let the guy do his job, and while everybody's talking, because I was like turning around, like, and I was thinking, like, gosh, I'm the youngest person in the studio at the moment. I don't think I felt weird about, like, okay, people shut up. I probably should have just said that, but I didn't. But
because when you did that. Yes, and yes, it must have been. She's such a diva. With the Globe session, actually, you do an amazing version of that Bob Dylan song, don't you? Mississippi, which was on one of his. Was it Love and? I can't remember what the album was called now.
I can't remember which record that's on either.
Love and Theft.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's not where I heard. I just heard it on a cassette, and Sheryl said, "Hey, Dylan asked me to." Play this, if I would be interested in doing this song. And, he's like, yeah, I wrote it for you, Sheryl, and all this. And so I listened to it and I was like, ooh, yeah, let's do it, And I think we ended up recording that in LA. That was sort of after the fact.
Right.
And so we went into the studio, and then I just had this idea of playing. I said, let's try to make it sound like Tambourine Man, with like electric 12 string and make it really jangly.
Yes.
And we did that, and it was so much fun. I don't know, it was like maybe one of the easiest songs that I think Dan McCarroll played drums on it, and it just fell together, like it was lean and mean and jangly and full of Dylan, so it was good. It was all really a delight to be able to do that, and yeah, I'm very flattered that you mentioned that, because like, wow, yeah, that's a cool cover of a Dylan song, and that's not easy to do without thinking of Dylan all the time.
Well, absolutely. But I do remember, I think, getting that particular Dylan album, and that was the track on the album. But obviously, that album hadn't come out when you did that recording. So
exactly, yeah, it hadn't been out. I mean, that's why literally, listened to it. I'm pretty sure it was on a cassette, because I think that was a lot of our references back in those days. Is just like throw the cassette on and even record your song ideas on a cassette. So I've got like stacks and stacks of cassettes. In fact, which leads me to my favorite mistake. While we were recording Globe Sessions, we there was a lot of people in the building. Like there was this artist named Dan Zanes who, was in a studio next door. I think the Ramones were down the hall. The drummer from Bad Company, gosh, I can't think of his name right now. The drummer from Bad Company was in another room, and I think Elvis Costello was in, and it wasn't a studio, but it was this big building that housed a lot of like individual studios, like private studios, and so there were a lot of people popping by and visiting us while we were recording, and Sheryl mentioned to me like, hey, we've got all these people that are, I'm sure, wanting to play on our record, because they're our neighbors, maybe we do something with them, and I'm thinking of having a jam session and just have everybody set up and just play. She goes, the only problem I have with that is I don't like jamming, so maybe let's find something that we could jam on. Which I thought was like, okay, that doesn't make any sense, but I can understand. Yeah, I'll find something. So I have always at that time, I would have like 2 shoe boxes full of cassettes and my cassette player. And I, would listen through, and I'm like, okay, this is kind of an interesting idea. What do you think of this? And Cheryl's listening to it. And it was basically the chords of, Favorite Mistake, and I'm humming along to it. I'm just playing, and she, oh, I really like this. What do you think? Should we? I go, well, are we writing a song, or is this going to be for a jam? And she's like, well, maybe we should just write this song or whatever. And so like within 2 hours we had the Favorite Mistake all written and ready to go. And at that point it was like the jam session was supposed to happen. She goes, well, hey, there's been a change of plans. We're not going to have that jam session. So I'm like, oh, okay. So much for that. But it led to, the fortunate thing is it led to, one of her biggest songs.
Yes.
And it was all sort of because we had a little distraction, I think, was what aided, coming up with it. because it was sort of like, oh, this is for a different purpose. So maybe you know, the the pressure is not on, and so we were able to kind of just blindly go in and write this song. And she had this idea of, like a personal story and all that stuff. I mean, all I really did with it was supply the music and help her edit the lyrics, So I didn't with us, sometimes like I'll bring her like a verse and a chorus and we'll work off of that. And then other times it'll be like she'll have something and I'll help her work on it. And then sometimes it's like, I just need you to help me on the music. So I feel like I'm a conduit for her, and I feel like that's a good, role for me, because it kind of takes the pressure off of me having to like really deliver, you know, high level. Well, I shouldn't say it like that, high level songs, but you know what I mean? Like, I feel like, oh, I could just, react naturally and like, oh yeah, this would be cool. Why don't we do this? Let's make this, sound like Nick Cave or something, or I don't know. Even though we end up not sounding anything like Nick Cave, but we can pretend that we're Nick Cave.
Which is because around that time, then, when do you decide to make your solo album? When does this come into your consciousness? Was this around 2000 then?
Yeah. So I had moved from LA. I moved up to Portland, Oregon, when it was sort of like going through this renaissance, like an indie pop renaissance with like the Shins and Elliott Smith. And there was like all this, Pavement was one of the main reasons too.
Yes.
But I had a few friends up there, but Steve Malkmus, I was like going, wow, I'm in the same town as Steve Malkmus. I thought that was the coolest thing, even though like, it's like, how did I become such a big fan of theirs? But so I loved it. The free spirit, it felt like a really great safe haven for artists and in particular musicians. And so I get up there and I found this like really cool house in the Northwest Hills. Nothing posh, just it had a little bit of land, but it was like just perfect for, creating a little basement studio, which I did. And I had all these song ideas, and I was trying to find a band to, or some people to create a band with. But I didn't want to do the typical, what was happening at that time. There were a lot of bands that were doing like pretending they were Crazy Horse and Neil Young. There was a lot of still a lot of flannel and a lot of that kind of stuff happening. And I was like, I can't, I've already done that. I'm not doing that anymore. But I want to find something unique. So I had this friend that knew everybody in Portland, and he just said, I'll find you a good collaborator. And he introduced me to this guy, Keith Schreiner, who was a electronic whiz, and he was doing music that was kind of like Bjork,
Right.
like all electronic, all beats. He created this, big electronic, artistic sea or whatever it was. And I met him, and he was like, oh, I don't really work with rock dudes. I do something different. He goes, do you like John Cage? And I was like, oh yeah, of course. Well, who else do you like? And we were comparing like, and then I just mentioned, well, my earliest experience with electronic music was Karl-Heinz Stockhausen off of Deutsche Grammophon. And that was some of the earliest like electronic. And he was like, I want to do music with you. So
Right.
so he said, well, he goes, I kind of just create on the spot. He had a lot of like film music that he would intersperse like a DJ. He kind of operated like a DJ. Had a mixer, he had samplers, he had synths. And he said, look, there's a club called Ohm there. It's an electronic hip hop club. And on Sundays, there's never anybody there because everybody's usually hungover. So there's usually like 2 or 3 people there. And I've arranged to work on my material in the club just for free, to just for drinks or whatever, and they don't worry about, pulling people in. You can just pretty much use this beautiful sound system. And so he said, why don't you bring your guitar down and bring some ideas and we'll just jam them out. And I'm like, what, at a club, with an audience and stuff? Yeah, there's just going to be a couple of people, it's not a big deal.
Right.
I'm like, all right, well, yeah, I'll try that. I mean, I'm always up for something new. So I brought my guitar down and, there was nobody there. There was like the bartender and there was the sound guy. And then I think there was like some old 75-year-old dude that was like all dressed up like a pimp. And that was it. And so he said, Keith says, well, okay, just, play any idea and I'll play along. So I thought, okay, I've got 8 or 9 songs. I'll just start playing stuff. And I just had an acoustic guitar and I started singing. And I'm thinking like, oh, I don't hear anything. Keith's not playing anything. Maybe he just hates this music so much that he's in shock. He doesn't want to play. Second verse, all of a sudden I hear like this pulse behind me. I hear, some dialogue from a film all echoed out and all that while I'm playing it in the key that I'm playing it in. And then all of a sudden the second chorus comes in and there's like a full on like slamming beat. It was kind of guerrilla-esque, and I was thinking, man, this guy's a genius. Wow, how can he possibly do all this stuff? And it was just that he was good at improvising and coming up with stuff on the fly. And I just like, okay, I got to make a record with that guy. So that's what I ended up making this, my one and only solo record called Dig Up the AstroTurf.
Right.
And, and it has some stuff that's sort of, little drum and bass kind of vibe, but with songs. I Walk a Cloud, I think was one. And yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I had I didn't have any high hopes for it. I just thought, this is just, I've made enough money doing stuff with Sheryl. I'm just going to make an art project. I don't care if anybody hears it. Of course, I would love for people to hear it, but I didn't think like anything would happen with it. And not much did, but but we got funded by DTS, which is it's kind of like Dolby company,
Yes.
sound engineering, noise reduction or whatever. And DTS did a lot of movie technology, and they agreed to mix my record, fund mixing my record, as long as I did it in 5.1, which is surround sound. And so I thought, okay, challenge is on. Let's do it. So I made this record and mixed it in 5.1 with this guy, David Tickle. And I think Todd Rundgren had a little part in it too, the technical part of it. And I got a premiere in Las Vegas at the Consumer Electronics Show. There was like a little, 100-seat amphitheater lecture hall kind of thing, and they played my record in surround. They had the whole theater like in surround, like going to the movies pretty much, but it was just my music, and it sounded incredible. And afterwards, this really tall guy comes over to me and he was like, I just want to tell you that was incredible. That was an incredible experience for me. I'm like, thank you, sir. Wow, this means a lot. Well, it turned out the guy was Alan Parsons.
Right.
I was
God.
like, I thought he looked familiar, but I was, it's not, it was so weird. And to get that compliment from him, having done, Dark Side of the Moon, that was the big, I thought, well, okay, I don't care, if this record sells 5,000, Alan Parsons made my day.
Well, absolutely. No, I loved it. Actually, it was a solo album he did called Turn of a Friendly Card, I think was one of his. I don't know. My brother loved Alan Parsons, actually. So it's there. It's all there. So with your sort of work, obviously you collaborate, but with Sheryl, the last kind of album, Be Myself, was that the last kind of real project that you worked on with each other? Was that the?
Well,
I know you,
yeah,
you did,
that was the last full album that we did together. I produced that and I used Chad Blake to mix it, who's, the Black Keys guy, mixer, a masterclass mixer, and that was a great experience. I love that record a lot. It wasn't the last thing. The last thing that we did together was this song called Forever that we did it for her documentary called Sheryl. It's on it was one of the cable companies, I think it was Showtime, had approached Sheryl about doing a documentary on her career. And she just said, well, don't you usually do that when the artist is dead? and they said, well, yeah. She goes, well, I'll do it under one condition. And that is if we could write or add 2 brand new songs, and you can film us writing it. You can film us as we record it. And so we wrote this one song called Forever, and it was originally her label, Big Machine Music. They were the head of it was a big supporter of her, this guy Scott Borchetta, and he was asking her to you guys need to do the rock thing, you know, why don't you guys do, go do like do all that blues rock stuff that you guys are so good at. And I was like, oh gosh, I'm not a blues guitar player at all. I mean, I can play the riffs and stuff like that, but I am not a blues guy. And I don't know what he means by that. And anyway, and I just said, well, let's just do what we do, like, why does there have to be any sort of, proposal made on what we write? And so she's like, yeah, he's just trying to be, helpful and all that. But, like a lot of these guys that from the big record labels are just, everybody's an expert, but you don't ever get any really good, just put it out and promote it. You know what I mean? That's what I think labels should do, rather than say, well, this is the more commercial version of what you should be doing. Yes. All these experts. And I think that's just ruining music. It should be all about the art first and then the commerce. But that's just my idealism. But anyway, so I was, came up with a couple of ideas that I thought, okay, well, I'll try to rock. And, I started working on this one idea with Sheryl. And then we were like, at the end of it, we were like just laughing. And we're like, maybe Twisted Sister would like this because it sounded so cheesy. And we were like, oh my God. So we got off that. And I said, hey, I have this little idea. It's a little contrived. It's kind of like the idea of living for the moment and, nothing lasts forever. And I'm like, but maybe nothing lasts forever has been said so many times in a song. How about there's no such thing as forever. That sounds a little more original. So we ended up writing this song, and that was, and we performed it, singing, playing acoustic guitars face to face, with microphones, singing live without any baffles or sound. It was just, in the room. And we did this song just like practically live. We did overdubs, but we did the basic of the song live, facing each other. And it's one of the best songs. I feel like, if I were to choose what's the best song you've ever written with Sheryl Crow, I'd say it's this song called Forever.
Right.
And it ended up getting a Grammy nomination a couple of years ago. So I was like, well, hey, there you go. There's some justification for it. At least it didn't go to Twisted Sister.
No,
And
absolutely. God, that's such a nice. Did you enjoy the documentary?
I did. I thought it was really good. I think there was, I think there should have been more Bill Bottrell in it, because he really is the one that, to me, in my mind, he was the architect of her music in the beginning, and then it blossomed and went. It went on its own journey. I think there were more people behind the scenes that should have had a little more, but the documentary is, it's Sheryl, so it's like it's got to be about her. But that
Yes.
just, you know, you know, uh, I guess, I guess I was hoping to have more of a part of it, but I got a good, chunk in there. But I made like pretty much every record with her, and I would have been nice to see some of the, us actually working in the studio, but there's a short amount of time to tell a story, and there was a lot to tell.
And it
So
was, yes, I mean, it was just interesting, wasn't it? I mean, it is like with all these interviews, there is sort of intrigue with certain things, and obviously there's a I mean, she does. I'm pleased that they do kind of mention the whole saga around leaving Las Vegas. I thought that could have
yeah,
been quite tricky, and but they seem to do something
yeah,
about that, which was probably a little bit of, probably got a lot of chat about how they're going to navigate that little episode of their lives.
yeah. That kind of stuff happens, and I don't think that there's anybody you could point the finger at or whatever. Um, I feel like the one thing I'm glad that the documentary did show that there were a lot of people in her life that helped her. It wasn't her just sitting there doing everything.
No.
And obviously she's one of the greats, and has a far reach in many generations. I mean, I just wrote with a 22-year-old the other day, who is a big fan of Cheryl's and very influenced by her. And I was like, gosh, look at that. Your parents probably listened to Sheryl, but yet this is carried over to other generations. And so her influence, I think, on young up and coming female artists is strong, and it's inspiring, because she came out in a time where there was grunge and it was all male oriented, and was able to create an original music with a voice and all that. I think I don't want to say pioneer, but in a way kind of.
Well, the 90s was a difficult period for sort of female rock musicians or singer-songwriter. I mean, you could just look at the film Woodstock 99, but I think they had 3 women on the bill, and it was all the Red Hot Chili Peppers, Marilyn Manson, all these heavy bands, weren't they? It was not a great time. It was a bit of a misogynistic kind of rock
Oh,
out.
right. And you think things have, have progressed or whatever, or we've gotten better or more knowledgeable and understanding about things. It's so almost like, no, we haven't learned anything. And I still feel like that's kind of the way it is. I mean, there's maybe more people understanding, you know, the broad range of people that are out in the world. That is a great thing. And but yeah, back then, you know, that whole misogynistic aspect of the music business still, you know, reeking, and maybe still does in a way. I'm glad that that are women that are trying to really forge their way and having a voice. I think that's like, you know, I mean, I wouldn't have had a career without one. So, you know, I'm very
Yes.
thankful for Sheryl, you know, trusting me and um, you know, allowing me into her world and all that. I just, you know, could have been anybody really, but I was lucky to be there. But I like a lot of different music, so I think I can really, you know, roll with people.
Because on your
Uh,
website, you've got you're promoting is Sarah Evans. Is this?
yeah, yeah. Yeah, that was a record I did. Was it last year or the year before? And I had written the reason why I did that. Yeah, my website is a little outdated right now. I mean, I need to like kind of update it, but I got together with her through a mutual friend, and this publisher said, "Hey, you know, would you be interested in writing with Sarah Evans? She's, you know, country artist." And I thought, yeah, you know, anybody who wants to work with me, I'll work with them. I don't have any, you know, I'm just happy doing music. And we got together, and she was going through a very um, rough patch, you know, relationships and, you know, restraining orders and all these crazy things going on. And I didn't really know her, nor did I really know her music that well. I knew she was well respected. She's, you know, a strong woman that could come out and belt it and this and that. Um, but I couldn't get over how open she was to telling me about all these very personal details of her relationship. It was really just, it just struck me as like, wow, this is mind blowing, you know, like, you know, usually people, you know, you get to know somebody and then, you know, the onion is peeled and you get to know them more. But right off the bat, she didn't know who I was or any, you know. And I think she felt that I could be trusted, I think, in the studio and all that. And at the same time, I was going through some relationship problems with my wife. We went through counseling and got through this really testing time period, like a lot of people did, you know, during COVID and all that. It was kind of, you know, reevaluating your life. So in a sense that I had this, you know, I felt like I was going through a similar thing that Sarah was going through, although not as harsh. No restraining orders, no, you know, cars trying to run you over, nothing like uh,
Yes.
but so I ended up, you know, I had never made a country record before. And so, and she said, well, I want you to make a record like how you do with Sheryl. And so I just got some really great people together and focus on the songs. And, I, you know, I think we made a really great record. There's a really amazing song called Pride that Maddie Diaz co-wrote with her that I feel like that's it has, I don't know if it was intended to be written about what it was, but I feel like it has so many double meanings, double entendres throughout that could be, you know, perceived as, many different things. But
Yes.
yeah, I feel, I became a fan of hers afterwards. I'm not, maybe on the political end of things, I'm not the same type. I'm a, I'm a liberal from San Francisco, so like, what can I say? But
Yes.
I'm not a Trumper. Like, uh, but anyway, so, and I don't, I kind of feel like you need to work with everybody no matter what, uh, I mean, you can have, discriminatory, uh, you know, have, let's see, scratch that.
Yes.
I feel like I don't like to limit. I really love working with people that really want to work with me. It's like, okay, there must be a reason. And so I can bring what I can, sense, whatever it is, sensibility or ideas and stuff. And so I thought it was a great experience. And she's a wonderful person, and wasn't really the typical type of person that I would work with. And that's maybe part of the intrigue for me, is to work with someone I wouldn't really typically work with.
Well, and yeah, so looking forward then, what have you got on the sort of horizon at the moment? What projects have you got sort of potentially coming up?
Well, okay, I've been doing a lot. I've been writing and recording a little bit with Bruno Major,
Mhm.
who's fantastic. Is like one of my. I think he's a Londoner. Comes out here every once in a while and writes, and I just love his sensibility. And we wrote this really great song called Two Empty Glasses, and it's about our respected dads. And also been working a little bit with Sarah Jarosz, who's a kind of modern bluegrassy, um, incredible artist, I think. And she's part of a whole new wave of bluegrass players that have like kind of pop sensibilities, and lyrically more modern lyrics than, when you think of bluegrass, you're thinking, it's all, nature and climbing mountains and doing
Yes.
this, it's more, it's maybe just using bluegrass instruments with a modern lyric writing and melodies. So I've been working a little bit with her, and that's been really fun. I've been working with this guy named Josiah Lemming, who's also kind of he's a native Tennessean, and he's kind of got a little bit of the Smoky Mountain kind of thing. And we've been collaborating on some stuff that I think is really great. I'm really happy with that. It's not really, it's borderline country. I guess everything is kind of country these days. Just slap an acoustic guitar on it and it's country.
Yes.
But lyrically, I like country aspects, but I don't like to do, I like to stretch the boundaries a little bit. So yeah, so I've been doing that. I've got a couple of songs coming out with Julian Jacqueline. I've written, well, last year, well, I hadn't written with Sheryl in quite a while. And then just recently, my dad passed away, and that was hard, but he had been dying for quite a, he had Alzheimer's, and so in some respect I'd lost him a while ago, but she kind of reached out after she found out that my dad died, and then was consoling and stuff, like, I mean, it was really sweet of her to reach out, and then we ended up we got together and to write some songs. So we've got maybe about 6 or 7 new songs that we've written together this year, but we really haven't recorded anything because she's been on the road so much. But so yeah, that pretty much, I'm writing almost every day. And I am working, I'm trying to do a EP with a bunch of songs that haven't found a home that I've written. And I'm thinking of calling it like, not refugee. Oh shoot. Now I'm blanking. I'm going to call it. It's a bunch of songs that didn't really have a home. And so I'm going to just put it out. I'm going to do my version of a bunch of these songs that never got released that I feel like are really good. And I performed them live before, and so I got a good sense of what those would be. But anyways, yeah, that's what I've been up to.
Yes, and Nashville, is that a nice place to live? Does that feel like home now?
Yeah, California is always going to be my home, really. My kids have grown up here, and I feel like this. Yeah, this is home for me. Real home is the Bay Area and San Francisco. And to a degree, London feels like home whenever I go back there. And I'm hoping to be able to get out there by fall. I'm going to probably do some more writing with Bruno and other. There's an artist named Maya Lane that I really like that I've written a song with her. I'm hoping to get out there and then maybe visit some friends. And I'm going to bring my youngest son out there because he's really into football, your footy,
yes.
not American football. He loves, we call it soccer here, or I call it football. But so I'm hoping one day to be able to get back there, probably in the fall, I guess, and then we're going to go to a football game. I don't know what team we're going to go see. Whoever is there, because I don't have a favorite.
Yes, my God.
But, so I'm hoping to be able to bring him out there, and so
it'll be amazing. And it's great that you got sort of quite so much on, and probably in the next year or two another album or some work with Sheryl as well. So
there's some things on the pipeline that are gonna happen, and definitely I think my next record, I'm working on it with my older son. That is, like, he's a pretty good engineer and he can play upright bass, and I'm going to make it a little more dreamy but acoustic, so it's going to be really sparse and not a ton of layers of stuff, but make it interesting to listen to. But it's going to be more about the songs than anything. So
well, it's interesting you've got that Nick Drake post that you put on Facebook recently, because actually I've just been in touch with Joe Boyd because he's got a book out, so we're going to do an interview very soon about his new book. So good old Joe, because he sort of did Nick Drake, but he also did very early Incredible String Band and Pink Floyd, didn't he, and various other people. So he's a legend.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love all that, like, folky English stuff, and Fairport at convention and stuff like that. All that, like, kind of mystical stuff. It just intrigues me. It's like, I don't know what it is, but I imagine, like, there's probably a whole new generation that's kind of doing kind of similar vein of music like that, like kind of, I don't know,
Yes.
call it progressive folk or something. I don't. Richard
But
Thompson.
yes, the work of Richard Thompson, Richard Thompson, and then Linda.
Yeah,
I Want to See the Bright Lights Tonight, which was amazing, and Sandy Denny as well, which is another one who's fantastic. And
that's right. Well, this young girl, Maya Lane, who's I think a Londoner, I'm pretty sure, and she sounds a lot like Sandy Denny, actually.
right,
Like kind of surprised, a little bit of like Joni meets Sandy Denny. And I was like, wow, this girl could really do something cool. She's got like this beautiful voice. And then lyrically, we were able to like make it very colorful, you know? So I'm hoping the song that we did will eventually become a master or get released.
fantastic.
Yeah. So I'm going to be Zoom writing with her, I think, in a couple of weeks. So, and then I think that's going to sort of light the fire for me to try to make a trip out there. And I've got a few friends out there. This amazing drummer named Chris Whitten, who used to, I think he played with Dire Straits and he played with McCartney. And he's an
Right.
incredible photographer. And so I think he's living in the Bath, Bristol kind of ish area out there. And then I still have a friend, Guy Chambers, who played in World Party.
Oh yes.
I will probably try to get out there and visit.
Well, it's always lovely. The autumn in the UK is very beautiful, so it's nice, isn't it? Really. So yes. Well, fantastic. Well, look, Jeff, thank you ever so much for this. And I know this has been an amazing insight into your creative life, which has been kind of fascinating. And hopefully, yes, I'll be very excited to hear your next couple of recordings, which is always good to see. I don't know.
I'll send you, if anything gets close to a release or something like that, I'll send you some stuff. I might even send you the Maya Lane thing if you promise not to like release it or whatever.
No,
but
God,
I like to share music with people and also like to get their opinion of what they think it is. And so, well, great. I really enjoyed.
Yes, well, thank you.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic, and so pleased to. Yes, we've lined this up so well. I think I was actually when I was emailing you. I think I was in America at the time, which was all good because of time. But then I realised when I was putting in my diary, it was kind of going for LA. And when I came back to the UK, I was really confused because a lot of the dates were like, that's strange. I'm sure I was having to go back to the emails going, no, that was definitely because I'd forgot to change the time thing of. So anyway, that was.
On your calendar.
Yeah, on the calendar.
A lot of people do that. I mean, and that's why I always have to like kind of double check. And I'm so sorry, but the last time it was one of the. I'm pretty punctual, and I'm not. I might appear to be very flaky, but I'm not really. I pride myself in, being there and being on time and all that kind of silly stuff. But it was one of those days. It was like, okay, one thing after another sort of happened. Like, okay.
Yes. Well, I
had no way of getting in touch with you. So until I got back. But anyway, it happened.
Well, thank you. It was magic. Okay, well, look, I'm going to go to bed. But I really hope it goes well for this year, and I hope you get to the UK in the autumn. So there you go. Yeah. Look, have a lovely day. Take care. Thanks,
you
Jeff.
Too.
Take care.
Right.
Bye-bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
And that, dear listener, in showbiz is the end of the interview. You probably gathered that. Anyway, a massive thank you to Jeff for giving me the time for that interview. I have or will put a link to his website in the notes below. This has been the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can just go to all those social media platform sites and put C86 Show in. And my name, you'll be able to find me. All these interviews have been archived on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean, and various other sites. Anyway, have a great week. Stay safe.